Hi boys and girls, it's Mr. Fallon, and today we're starting a new series of videos, and it's called Spot Run Storytime. The way it's going to work is Mr. Fallon is up doing the spot run right now. You need to get up and start doing the spot run with me. And while we do the spot run, we're going to be reading a story, or we're going to be reading a book. The book we're going to be reading is Sideways Stories from Wayside School. When Mr. Fallon was your age, I used to love this book. So I can't wait to start reading this story to you while we spot run. So we're going to make our bodies stronger by doing the spot run, and we're going to be making our minds stronger by reading. So Mr. Fallon is going to start off with reading the first chapter of our book today. All right. Let's start off with the introduction. We'll do the first chapter and the introduction. This book contains 30 stories about children and teachers at Wayside School. But before we get to them, there's something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. Wayside School was accidentally built sideways. It was supposed to be only one story high with 30 classrooms in a row. Instead, it's 30 stories high with one classroom on each story. The builder said he was very sorry. So it was supposed to be a very long school, but they built it wrong and they made a very tall school instead. The children at Wayside like having a sideways school. They have an extra large playground. The children and teachers described in this book all go to class on the top floor. So there are 30 stories from the 30th story of Wayside School. So just imagine they have to go up 30 flights of stairs every day to get to their classroom. Are you still spot running? Come on, keep it up. It has been said that these stories are strange and silly. That's probably true. However, when I told stories about you to the children at Wayside, they thought you were strange and silly. That's probably also true. Are you strange and silly? All right, we're going to go to Chapter 1. And Chapter 1's about Miss Gorf. And there's our picture of Miss Gorf. We're going to still spot run. Miss Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. If you children are bad, she warned, or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Miss Gorf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count. But he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Miss Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. Uh-oh, what's going to happen? She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. Hey, that isn't fair, said Todd. John was only trying to help. Miss Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. Does anyone else have an opinion, she asked. Nobody said a word. So now, Joe's an apple, John's an apple, and Todd's an apple. Oh boy. Miss Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. Would you be scared if your teacher started turning all your classmates into apples? I do not allow crying in the classroom, said Miss Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet, and when they went home, they were too scared to even talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Mrs. Gorf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked into the room, Miss Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, "God bless you," and Paul sneezed. When Paul sneezed, Miss Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue and turned Nancy into an apple. Terrence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Mauricia turned to run away. She was halfway to the door when Mrs. Gorf's right ear began to wiggle. When she reached the door, Miss Gorf's left ear wiggled. Mauricia opened the door and had one foot outside. When Miss Gorf stuck out her tongue, Mauricia became an apple. Mrs. Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. Do you think it would be funny if your teacher fell over a piece of chalk? The three Erics laughed. They were turned into apples. Mrs. Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terrence, Mauricia, and the three Erics. Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. Lewis, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Miss Gorf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. I must be wrong, he thought. She must be a good teacher, if so many children brought her apples. He walked back down to the playground. The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Lewis, the yard teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in class. She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all the children were apples. Mrs. Gorf was very happy. Now I can go home, she said. I don't have to teach anymore. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. You're not going anywhere, shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Miss Gorf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed. Mrs. Gorf fell on the floor. The apples jumped all over her. So Mrs. Gorf was getting attacked by all the apples. Stop, she shouted, or I'll turn you into applesauce. But the apples didn't stop, and Mrs. Gorf couldn't do anything about it. Turn us back into children, Todd demanded. Mrs. Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, wiggled her ears, this time her left one first, then her right, and turned the apples back into children. All right, said Mauricia. Let's go get Lewis. He'll know what to do. No, screamed Mrs. Gorf. I'll turn you back into apples. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left one, stuck out her tongue, but Jenny held up a mirror, and Miss Gorf turned herself into an apple. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. What would you do if you were in the classroom and you didn't have a teacher? Even though Mrs. Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple. But none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Lewis, the yard teacher, walked in. Where's Mrs. Gorf, he asked. Nobody said a word. Boy, am I hungry, said Lewis. I don't think Mrs. Gorf would mind if I ate an apple. After all, she has so many. Uh-oh. He picked up the apple, which was really Mrs. Gorf, shined it on his shirt, and ate it. Boys and girls, that's the end of chapter 1 of our book. We're going to come back with another video tomorrow doing chapter 2. Boys and girls, did you do the spot run the whole time Mr. Fallon read chapter 1? I hope you're having an outstanding day. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.